Welcome to the Long Range Pursuit Podcast, presented by Gunworks, where we learn about and share long-range shooting techniques, science, and gear.
All right, well, welcome to another episode of the Long Range Pursuit Podcast. Today, this is Instructor's Corner edition, and we are joined by Brian Poor, our training director at the Long Range University, and Chris Hinojosa, member of our sales team.
Not an instructor.
Not an instructor. And today we are going to be talking about shooting from a tripod. So we're going to be covering sling, shooting from tripod, shooting on some uneven terrain, some proper fundamentals that you should be implementing into your practices to get the most out of a tripod. So I think we want to dive right into this new sling.
Yeah, so I think a little history on the sling.
What's a sling? Tripod sling?
Yes, tripod sling. It was a lot of these tripod shooting techniques, where they came from was the Marine Corps, in Fallujah and Ramadi during the Iraq War. And it was kind of unique in that they, oftentimes had to shoot through a porthole that might be 3 or 4 feet high, from inside a building, shooting through a porthole to the outside. So the ability to get that rifle to the exact right height, with a tripod, and then get like your enough stability for long range shooting was really something that the Marine Corps developed. And so I first got introduced to tripod slings, probably 6-7 years ago. And on the SWAT side of things, it was an absolute game changer, because now we literally had the ability to shoot a minute of angle, from the kneeling, and maybe 2 minutes of angle from the standing without a rear support, by using the sling correctly, and a lot of the kind of militarized ones were kind of big and unwieldy and bulky, so when I got to Gunworks here, one of my, first projects I started working on is I wanted to develop something that was, useful for hunters. And I didn't want it to take away from just the utility of our normal rifle sling, so what I have here So for those not watching on video, I'll be as descriptive as possible. I have our basic Gunworks rifle sling, and it's actually a really good sling for carrying a rifle, which is 95% of what we do with the slings. We use it to carry the rifle, and I think what we do better than a lot of the other slings on the market is, number one, it's narrow. And narrow is actually a good thing on a sling because it means it slips down into a crevice between your pack strap and your shoulder. And a wide sling tends to slide off all the time. A narrow sling will find something to dig into and hold. And then I think the other thing that really helps the sling function really well is just a carrying strap, is the fact that our attachment points are on the side of the rifle stock, down at the bottom, as opposed to on the butt stock. So it helps that rifle sit at an angle that is less likely to slide off your shoulder. So my goal in developing this was to do absolutely nothing that would take away from the utility of the sling as designed. And so really, the sling that I'm holding now, there's 2 pieces. I have our existing rifle sling, which has just a small attachment point added to it that most people never would even notice, or they just see this little loop and wonder what it was for. And then the other part of the tripod sling is this strap here, which we call the tripod strap. And this is designed to be attached to your belt and then carried in your pocket. So the concept here is I take this, I attach it to my belt. I'm a right-handed shooter, so I want to attach it by my right hip. And once I've attached to my belt, I'm just going to carry this in my pocket. So it's out of the way. It doesn't impact the utility of this sling. However, if I set up in a position where I need that added stability I get from having the tripod sling, it's just a simple matter of taking this out of my pocket and clipping it into the loop on the tripod sling there. And now I've got the ability to put tension back against that tripod using my hips. And we'll have a video playing on this, when this airs. Kind of hard to explain for the people that are just listening. But if you imagine that the rifle is attached to the center of the rifle on the tripod. And so I have the sling attached up on the forend, and this sling now goes down and it's attached to my hip. So when I push my hips back, I'm putting down pressure on the front of the rifle. And what that does is I put enough down pressure on the front of the rifle that the front leg of that tripod acts like it wants to come off the ground. And then with my support hand, I create a tripod out of my body. So my legs are squared up, they're spread apart, and then I'm leaning forward into that tripod, then basically putting pressure down the tripod legs. So I'm using a tripod to support the rifle, but then I'm also using the tripod to create stability in my body, so my body is no longer moving side to side behind that tripod.
Yeah.
So if you can envision your body being a tripod behind the rifle, because my support arm on the tripod leg is giving me that third leg of support versus just two if I was just standing there. And then I think that combination of the down pressure and the fact that when you do this position correctly, it makes the front leg of the tripod want to come off the ground. I think it helps that rifle recoil in a really natural manner because it just rotates around those two back legs.
Yeah.
And it helps that rifle recoil in the same manner as it does when you're shooting prone or off a bench, so you don't get a position related zero change.
That's great.
That's the basic concept on using the tripod sling.
And so you got basically have a strap that's attached to your belt loop, and then picture your rifle sling. Let's just say your rifle's clamped into a tripod, right? So the rifle's sitting on its own on top of a tripod, and you have that rifle sling hanging down from the sling hanging down from the rifle. Now the strap is going up to, what would you say, about midpoint on that sling, or about 2/3 forward?
That's about midpoint.
About midpoint on there. So now we have made a mechanical attachment from our body to the front end of that rifle. So whereas like a rear support would stabilize, well, you have basically like a tripod or a bipod on a rifle would stabilize the front of it, right? Now we replace that with a tripod that's stabilizing the front. We still have to have, if we were shooting prone, we'd have a rear support, right? An additional support somewhere else on that rifle. Now we just move that support. Essentially, we're tugging it on the front.
Yeah.
Because you say you're pulling the rifle down. So, we have a mechanical attachment to replace that rear support now.
Yeah. And it's meant for situations where you can't get a rear support. So if I'm shooting from a sitting position, I can get a rear support, whether it's a bag under my armpit or whether it's my backpack across my lap. So from the sitting position, I don't really find that the tripod sling adds much to it. But where it really shines is in your kneeling positions and your standing positions, because there's no real way to get rear support. And I'm not going to say that it's quite a direct replacement for rear support, but it really minimizes the effect of not having rear support.
Yeah.
Putting it that way.
You're going to cut down that wobble zone quite a bit there in your sight picture.
Yeah. And, kind of getting a little bit into, where it applies, like antelope hunting or sheep hunting, if I want to shoot prone, that means, if I used a ravine or something to get close, so I'm masked and they can't see me, for me to crawl up on the top and shoot, I've got to crawl all the way up to the skyline to shoot prone, because I need to be, low and flat across the top and at least level. To shoot sitting, I've got to crawl up to the top. And actually, to make the sitting position more comfortable, you have to be a little bit on the forward slope, because if you're on the reverse slope at all sitting, you have this I'm falling backwards feel. And what I really like about the tripod sling is it lets you work that reverse slope, because it works, the kneeling and the standing work very well. When the ground slopes up in front of me and only my head and the rifle are actually clearing the top of the slope from the animal's perspective. So it lets me do all my movement and stuff back on that reverse slope. And like antelope hunting, sometimes it's 50 yards to get up to that place where the ground slopes enough, and you're going to get busted trying to stalk that last 50 yards.
Crawling.
But if you can work in that reverse slope and have a shooting position that allows you to, that's accurate enough to shoot distance, that allows you to work in that reverse slope, I really think that's the advantage of it.
Yeah, you're going to have to be kneeling or standing.
Yep.
You can't do that sitting.
Yep.
So, you think about like a high country, elk hunt or sheep hunt or something, and how those little ridges roll.
Yep. And
for you to get high enough to actually crawl to where you would have a forward, on the front side of the slope, there's a lot of time there. And especially like sheep are always looking, right?
Yeah.
Elk can get kind of dumb, but sheep are always looking. They're going to bust you every time.
Yeah. I figure sheep and antelope are the two that are, they're going to pick you off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
And especially areas where there's no timber. I mean, some types of terrain, we can use a bush or a tree or, use something to block that movement to help get us over the top, and then just peek around the corner of a bush or around the corner of a tree or something. But you get that wide open country, whether it's, sheep hunting or whether it's antelope hunting, there's nothing to hide you on the skyline.
Right.
Yeah. I tend to play more with the antelope hunting and, a lot of flat terrain. And there's always grass, right? You can almost never get prone antelope hunting. And so I guess we're kind of completely sidetracking. We started with the sling and now we're just hunting antelope. But story time.
I think it's perfectly on board though, because it talks about the applications when, I really think this is beneficial.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, that have been, kind of hunting their own life, just getting back to tripods, it's like, most people hunted most of their life without the benefit of a tripod.
Yeah.
Just like I spent years and years doing SWAT deployments without the benefit of a tripod. But boy, once I got to that point and I really saw what that tripod could do to me, it's right there on that level of importance in my equipment, right next to the binoculars and the rifle.
Yeah.
Next comes tripod.
Exactly.
Because my ability to shoot under pretty much any situation with a level of accuracy to be able to shoot a decent amount of distance is really dependent upon that tripod.
Yeah.
I never even thought about that, not coming from, military law enforcement type background whatsoever, but the thought about a tripod being able to sit back away from the face of, say it's a building or whatever, and so be able to shoot from concealed cover, not have to stick the rifle barrel out a window. That just clicked. I never thought about that before.
Oh yeah, that's why it's huge.
Yeah.
We used to stack, chairs on top of beds on top of desks to try to get some sort of a semi-stable position that was high enough to see out a window. Whereas as soon as you have a tripod, it's literally just a matter of set the tripod to the right height and stand there behind the rifle.
Yeah.
And it's much more comfortable and it's not nearly as cumbersome.
Yeah, you're not sticking out the face of a building.
Yeah. And you're sitting back and you're concealed.
Yeah. In the shade.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. I like that idea.
Yeah. We're pretty good at being comfortable if you're going to be there for 12 hours.
I can imagine that.
Yeah.
I can imagine that.
So talking about tripods and what they can do for you, not having the proper knowledge on how to utilize them could probably be a detriment to what you're trying to do. So what are some things some people can do to get the most out of their tripod, whether that be setting it up, like you said, getting it to the right height? I think that's one that confuses a lot of people. They'll eyeball it and say that looks good, and then get into the tripod and realize their body position is.
First off, for the folks that are just listening to this and aren't watching, Chris did a really good, video on tripod use. What, about 2 years ago, year and a half ago?
Been a while. Yeah.
So if you search that on Gunworks, tripod use, Chris has a really good video that explains, a lot of the basic concepts of using a tripod. That's really good. For the folks listening, I think the biggest mistake I see with tripods is people always want to set it up too high. Mm-hmm. And so what we always say is, I want the top of that tripod, when I'm in my shooting position, I want the top of that tripod to be about sternum height.
Yeah.
Now, when I put a rifle on top of it and I lean forward into that tripod, it's going to put it at about the right height. And if you set that tripod up too high, you end up standing too upright where you're not able to use that tripod to stabilize your body at all.
Yeah.
So I want to be able to lean into that tripod a little bit, creating that tripod with my body and my support hand, so that I'm getting, not only is the rifle being supported by the tripod, but I'm taking body wobble out of there with the tripod as well.
Yeah. What is as simple as it is, I think it's something that often gets overlooked, is the orientation of the legs when you're shooting.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. Go through that orientation of the legs and then orientation of the body. How would we set up behind a tripod?
Yeah. So really I'm always going to want to set that tripod up with 2 legs back, 1 leg forward. So when the rifle recoils, it has the ability to rotate onto those 2 back legs, and that front leg might come off the ground slightly, but that's a natural recoil motion for that rifle. And if you picture, if I was to set up wrong and put 1 leg back and 2 legs forward, when that rifle recoils, it's either going to rotate to one side or the other.
We're assuming the rifle's attached. Mechanically attached to the tripod.
Yeah,
right?
If it's mechanically attached. If you're shooting, one of the benefits of shooting off a bag on a bipod is, because the rifle isn't mechanically attached, is that tripod does nothing to interfere with that rifle's recoil, which is actually an advantage.
Yeah.
To a certain degree.
but you have to sit there and hold it.
Yeah.
Whereas like with this Nexus rifle, we have an Arca rail on the bottom of the fore end, so we can clamp that into a tripod and it can just sit there dead, right?
Yeah.
And we can move our body around behind it.
Yeah. So
we got 2 legs back, 1 leg forward. And then how do we square up behind it? Because obviously we're down a little bit, right?
Yeah, so we want to kind of match that tripod's configuration. So just like the tripod is 2 legs back, 1 leg forward, I want both I'll call them my hind feet back, and then my 1 leg forward is my support hand, on that opposite tripod leg, and basically if I reach across me, so I'm a right-handed shooter, so my left hand is reaching across and grabbing the tripod leg, the rear tripod leg on the right. And when I grab that tripod leg, I'm going to grab it thumb down. And I'm basically I'm not going to push forward on the tripod. Yeah. I'm going to drive my thumb towards down that tripod leg to the ground. So just like the tripod is 2 legs back and 1 leg forward, my body is my 2 legs back, my support arm forward.
Yeah.
And by going thumb down, that locks that elbow.
Yeah.
Because if I went thumb up on that grip, then I'd have bicep and tricep involved in stabilizing myself. But if I go thumb down, I can lock that elbow, and I've basically created that tripod out of myself.
Yeah.
And then I think the other thing on initial tripod setup is, especially when you're running I always start with the widest space possible. And I think, so if you look at our tripods, we get the ability to run the legs completely flat, and so if you're trying to shoot a low prone or something off a tripod, you could run them completely flat and you'd end up with a shooting position that's like 8 inches tall.
Yeah.
If we're running them in the sitting and the kneeling position, I like to run the legs in that intermediate position so I have a nice wide base. And so once you get up to the standing, just because of the amount of height you need, you have to run the legs at that steeper setting. Otherwise, you would never get the tripod tall enough. So get the widest possible base for the amount of height that you need. And then when you extend the legs, extend the thick sections first. So if I can build a position without ever, because the legs telescope inside each other, the lower ones are the skinniest and the weakest. So ideally I can build a position without ever depending on those skinny little legs that are telescoped inside. So always use your, the upper portions of the tripod first, when you're extending it out. That's your basic concepts on setting up with a tripod.
Yeah. Another one is magnification. Less magnification is your friend when shooting off a tripod. Yeah. You're going to see quite a bit of wobble.
Yeah.
Depending on the position, but scale that magnification back down.
Yeah. And the other thing I think too is, when we set up on it, and you're setting up on an animal, and Chris kind of alluded to this if you listen to our last episode, is that you want to check your wobble zone. And if my wobble zone is staying within the vitals, then I know that I can just press until that shot goes off, and that shot's going to land in the vitals. Yeah. But if my wobble zone is taking the crosshairs outside of the vitals or even off the animal, it's just a wing and a prayer if I take that shot.
Yeah.
So find something to make that position better if you find yourself in that position, where your wobble zone is too big. Now, psychologically, anytime we see some wobble, we're going to have this urge to jerk the trigger.
Yep.
Because you want to jerk that trigger as this kind of, you're going to feel this urge to jerk the trigger when the crosshairs are headed towards the vitals, or they momentarily pause in the vitals. Just right now, I want this gun to go off right now.
Yep.
And of course, when we jerk the trigger, we're going to disturb that shot. So you just have to accept that wobble. Now, psychologically, if I turn the power down, I don't see that wobble as much. And so psychologically, it's easier to have a good trigger press when I'm not seeing the crosshairs just float all over the place.
Right.
Because I feel stable. I have that perception of stability. Even though nothing has really changed, it's a psychological thing.
Yeah.
You'll probably shoot better at low power.
Exactly. Yeah. When you're uncomfortable in that position, the only thing you can think about is, how can I get this over with so I can get comfortable? So what you said there, dialing your magnification back, looking for something to take that wobble zone out. What do you like to use for aids in that regard? Backpacks, your sling.
Oh, as far as like shooting aids off a tripod?
Yep.
In the sitting, I really like using a backpack. Yeah. And whether that backpack is, depending on the size, if it's like an internal frame pack, oftentimes the size is about right that you can almost stand it up on end and prop it underneath your armpit. and you get some good armpit support out of it. And the other option is just to sit with your legs flat on the ground. And especially if you've got a big backpack with a bunch of stuff in it, just lay that thing across your lap and kind of hug it.
Yeah.
And that becomes your rear support. So those two things to get rear support work out really well. And the other thing that I think we overlook sometimes that applies to any one of these positions is look for that vertical support to put your body against. Because if I can set up my position right next to a big rock or a tree, where once I've set up a solid position, I lean an inch to my left or an inch to my right, and now my shoulder or my hip is against a rock or a tree. Yeah. You take away a lot of that body wobble that way.
Gotcha.
So look for those vertical objects you can lean against.
Might be deviating here a little bit, but something that I thought about that we see quite a bit, and especially in hunting situations, I guess from the perspective of mountain hunting situations, right? We don't, I guess between the three of us, we probably don't do much East Coast shooting across the cornfield, Midwest stuff, but we're always mountain hunting and shooting uphill at a steep angle. I don't know how many times, we've run into a situation where I can't get my bipod high enough, right? And I actually just watched a video yesterday or something or whatever, a guy shooting way uphill at a mule deer and, couldn't get a position, trying to find a down log or something to set the tripod up to try to get behind the gun enough. So we're shooting up at a 20 plus degree angle.
Yep.
And it's that problem just went away immediately the first time you set a gun on a tripod.
Oh, absolutely.
Because you can sit down behind it. You can set that tripod up at, whatever waist height, sit down behind it. We can lean back and point uphill. And now we have a support up here. But
yeah,
how many times we were behind there and can't get the bipod high enough and set it on backpacks, which is horrible.
Yeah.
Right? I watch guys
bounce and wobble and
your wobble goes, bounce is the big one. The thing's just bouncing all the time. You try to get behind it and your wobble zone is like feet instead of inches now.
Yeah.
But mountain hunting is like, you think about how much weight am I taking in, right? And it's like, I'm down to an 8.5 pound rifle and I've got, my camp in my bag and whatever. And it's like, well, I'm not going to take the tripod because it's 4 pounds. And anymore, I do not leave the truck without a tripod strapped in my pack. It's just those, well, you think in the mountains, you're either going to be shooting uphill, downhill, or flat.
Yeah.
And probably maybe call it, 33% odds that you're going to be shooting uphill. And that uphill with the tripod is just done.
Yeah.
Problem went away.
Yeah. And that uphill is, in level 3, we kind of teach 2 different ways to shoot that uphill. Yeah. And one of them is designed if you're on the same slope, so you're basically on the same slope as the animal and, you'll almost never get a bipod to work. It's just not high enough. But if you run that tripod in a pretty low setting and then put a backpack under your chest, so you're basically prone over the top of a backpack, a very high prone, but you can get a pretty good position that way. And then the other way we teach it is kind of to, you're on the opposite slope. So oftentimes you can't even see the animal if you're on the same slope as them. But imagine if I went down the mountain a little bit, crossed a little creek, and then went up on the opposing slope. Now I've gotten enough height above vegetation and stuff that now I have a clear field of view. But there's absolutely no way you're going to shoot prone from that position because the angle of the ground. So then it's just a matter of finding a rock or a tree to put your back against. Running that tripod pretty tall, like Chris was talking about, and just pulling that thing back into you, and you can get a pretty solid position. But you'd never make that work without a tripod.
Yeah.
I'll admit sometimes I just carry that little backpacker tripod, just knowing that I'm not going to use it for anything higher than seated.
Yeah.
And it's just tiny little legs on it. It's not super stable, but it's going to save me that shot opportunity. Right? So that's 2 pounds worth putting in the pack.
No, for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's a lot of situations where I think my hunting game has completely changed because of that tripod.
Yeah.
My daughter, 12 years old, and she's still trying to figure out how to get eye relief on a scope. So getting her to shoot prone, it's a lot of time suck just getting her on the scope and getting her on, so where she can see the target, acquire the target and whatnot. I set her on her butt behind a tripod seated, and it's just easy. It's like she shoots sub MOA. Well under MOA with that. Just sit her on the butt, set her behind tripod.
Yep.
And it's just easier for her in a little bit more upright position to get behind a scope, get eye relief proper.
Yep.
And we see this with a lot of shooters that have troubles getting eye relief, is if we can get them up just a little bit. Older shooters that can't get prone, can't get the neck up, that kind of thing. Now, we'll talk about it here, but your effective range is going to shrink.
Yep,
when our body's vertical, our effective range is going to shrink. But in the case of her, I'm not going to let her shoot past whatever she feels comfortable. So even if that's 200 or if that's 600, it's whatever she feels comfortable. And that's one of the things I've been teaching her is, what's your wobble zone? Do the crosshairs leave the vitals? And if they do, we're not shooting.
Yep.
And so, but get that target acquired when she's behind, sitting a little bit up, and get, stock position right. Because tiny little thing, and just, trying to get a rifle, against your shoulder is it's a whole nother game. So,
yeah. And probably if one is good, two are better. The other thing about tripods too is, if you're hunting with a buddy, or with a guide or whatever, there's a pretty good chance there's probably two tripods available somewhere, and running the tripod leg as your rear support, that's just, it's another game changer.
Yeah.
That replaces, in my mind, the use of a tripod sling, because you literally have 2 points of rifle support, even in the standing now. If you got a tall enough tripod, you can use the tripod leg in the standing as your rear support, and you're just using your non-shooting hand to pinch the rifle stock against that tripod leg, and it's bench rest
Rock
stable.
Solid.
And so that works very well, especially in the kneeling and the standing if you have two tripods.
Awesome.
Yeah. What is what if you were to make a generalization about reduced effective range, or I guess range capability with a tripod? Would you say the average shooter, you see a lot of guys come through class that maybe some have experience, maybe some don't. Does it knock them 50% back as far as versus a prone, or,
I think, if you just take the minute of angle capability, like in our position shooting, our marksmanship classes, we spend a lot of time just shooting on paper at 100 yards. So we're really tracking two things. We're tracking, number one, what's the level of precision they're capable of shooting? Is it 1 minute of angle? Is it 2 minutes of angle? And then, is there a position related zero change where the center of their group is no longer center, it's moved something, so those are the two things that we track, and iron out in that course. And I would say that I'll see some shooters that get pretty good at shooting minute of angle from the kneeling and 2 minutes of angle from the standing.
Yeah.
So then if I transcribe that out based on a vital zone size, and then probably subtract 30% from that just for field use, because there's going to be other errors in there somewhere. Based on actual shooting, like for example, one of the last classes we ran, where you're doing kind of deployment drills, you're working the reverse slope of a hill, and it was just a vital zone size piece of steel. It's about 12 inches tall and probably 14 inches wide, 15 inches wide, and running deployment drills at 400 yards, all on the reverse slope, all kneeling or standing. And it's just like, all right, go over here, sit up on a kneeling, take a shot, break your stuff down. All right, go over here. This is going to be standing, set up on it, and take a shot. I remember going 12 for 12 on hits on that, with a couple of shooters.
What kind of range?
At 400 yards.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so
okay.
Kneeling and standing will get you out to 400 yards. I'm pretty comfortable with most folks. Wind becomes the bigger factor, I think.
Yeah.
But sitting will take you out to 600 for sure. A good shooter, I think you can run. I honestly think a good shooter can run a good sitting position off a tripod as far away as they could shoot prone.
Yeah.
Like there's not really that much difference in the accuracy potential between prone and sitting once they learn to do that sitting right.
With a rear support, probably.
Yeah, obviously with a good rear support, it gets it down to that sub-minute of angle capability, which is really what we shoot in the prone.
Yeah.
Yeah. What, you mentioned earlier that, or I had mentioned earlier or whatever, that I tend to shoot with a bag on top of a tripod versus a clamp in. I have both. I guess I run both, but what's your kind of give and takes there? What do you think?
I think when you run a bag on the tripod, it requires your body isn't going to get as much stability out of it, because you have to be a little more upright, because you can't lean into it as much, because it doesn't have the opposing force of that tripod sling, creating stability in the tripod, because because it creates a lot of stability in the tripod, and that's what lets me lean against that tripod hard, is because I got an opposing force that's pulling that tripod down, so I'm not pushing that tripod away from me. So I get a lot of body stability when I run a sling on a tripod. If I just run a bag up there, I pretty much just have to I'll have to run the tripod a little bit taller, and I'll pretty much just have to let the rifle and the bag sit there, and there's nothing to really stabilize my body. The positive side is there's nothing disturbing that rifle's recoil. But on the negative side, I think it's more difficult to use that tripod to make the shooter's body more stable.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's big. It's a big difference. That's a whole different fundamental set of fundamentals.
Yeah, it really is a completely different shooting position, running a bag versus running, either clamped into a hog saddle or clamped into an arc rail.
An arc rail.
I would say my effective range is probably quite a bit less, right? I don't want to shoot. I have made shots out past 400, shooting off of a bag, off of a tripod, but I had the time to actually get a second tripod rear support. And so at that point, then I felt comfortable.
Yeah.
And of course, if you're shooting off a bag, you're going to need a flat forend. Your rifle you can't have your Remington, Kimber, Winchester style rounded stock or whatever sitting on top of a bag, because the rifle just rolls. Yeah. It rolls left to right. So you'd have to have for that type of setup, you'd have to have some type of clamping surface anyways. You're not going to have any stability. So I'm going to shoot a little bit, maybe 500 yards, but still 400 yards is a stretch for shooting off a bag on the tripod.
Yeah, but way more stable than shooting without the tripod, though.
Oh, yeah.
And at the end of the day, that's what it's about, is that tripod, easily doubles, if not triples, the range that we could effectively shoot standing or kneeling if we didn't have it.
Yeah. No, tripods are great. Yeah, they've been a game changer. Pretty awesome. Well, I think this was pretty good. Had a lot of good takeaways here. How to build a position here. We got some advantages on what it can do for you. The sling, is that something we're going to be trying to get that on the website coming up here soon?
Yeah, I got to get some time with Aaron to get the approval to get it for sale outside of what I'm giving away at classes.
Yep.
So right now I'm just giving it away.
Yeah.
Has basically, this is take this home after the class.
Gotcha.
In our tripod and in our level 3 classes.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, maybe soon we'll get that on the website. Keep an eye out for that. Thanks for jumping on here today, guys. Anything else you want to add?
No,
I think we're good. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, as always, guys, if you have any topics or suggestions or feedback, send that to podcast@gunworks.com, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, guys.
If you like what you're hearing here, please take a second and give us a 5-star rating and a positive review on iTunes or on your favorite podcast app. We appreciate your feedback and suggestions for topics you'd like discussed or questions you want answered on the podcast. You can reach out on Facebook or Instagram, or send us an email to podcast@gunworks.com. Also, be sure and check out our full offering of long-range gear at gunworks.com. Use promo code LRP for free shipping on any order.